Today's podcast is about ways you can help a friend who was raped. Okay, first I want to begin with a content warning. Today's podcast involves descriptions and discussions of experiences and impacts of sexual assault, which some survivors might find its content to be troubling. Before I really go into the meat of today's podcast, I want to encourage you to take a look at the article portion associated with this podcast. There's information on how to contact the National Sexual Assault Hotline, which an organization that can be reached at 1-800-656-4673. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and begin. When you find yourself in the position of having to support a friend who was just raped or another form of sexual violence, including assault or abuse or whatever you want to call it, I can see why this task could be daunting or it might seem overwhelming. And it might feel like something that needs to be handled by an expert. And in many ways, yes, it should be handled by the expert. But you're the friend. You don't need to be an expert. You need to be a friend. And by being there for your friend, you are already helping the process. You are already helping your friend who is a victim. Now, I could easily see why a friend might be afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. Last thing you want to do is say something that's going to traumatize them even further or hurt in the recovery process. Or maybe you're afraid that by helping your friend accept what's happened, you might be worried that by accepting this, that you might somehow be creating more problems for your friend. And because of this, I can easily see why it might be tempting to do nothing, to pretend it didn't happen. But then again, maybe that's not the best course of action. And before I go into the do's and don'ts of this podcast, I don't want you to think that all victims are monolith. They're all the same, and you can apply these do's and don'ts equally to all victims. Because remember, everyone is unique, everyone is special, everyone is different. So some of the tips here on how you can help your friend might be relevant to your friend's needs, and maybe it won't. So please keep that in mind. I think this would also be a wise time to, yes, listen to them. Talk to them, encourage them, and help them with their next step. But maybe also it's best to not be in give mode. Be in receive mode. Just receive what they have to say. Just listen to them. Just be a friend. Just listen to them. And let them tell you what they need. And believe them. It's possible that the abuser, the rapist, the person who committed the sexual assault, maybe they're going to go hire a lawyer, and that lawyer will do everything that he or she can to minimize the sexual assault and not take in the concerns of the victim, or possibly go as far as saying it didn't happen, or some other type of behavior to make the victim look like they're not believable. As a friend, you need to believe and trust your friend. So let's talk about believing your friend for a minute. Now, why would someone, especially your friend, telling you something in confidence, why would they lie about being raped, being sexually assaulted, or sexually abused as a child, or any other form of sexual violence? What do they have to gain from this? And if you're their friend anyways, then there's already a level of trust. I mean, it's not like I'm asking you to trust someone you don't know. I mean, they are your friend. There's already an established level of trust, and why would they lie about it? What do they have to gain? And second, remember, this is difficult for them to talk about what happened. I mean, they have to go back to the stressful event, to the stressor, to the thing that caused them to possibly have this PTSD, the sexual trauma. Maybe just consider that it's already very difficult for them to talk about it because, again, they're returning to the trauma. They might have very strong emotions of shame or guilt, or feel like for some reason, maybe it was their fault. That no one's going to believe them. Remember, this entire thing is very painful for them. Maybe sympathize with them. Let them know you understand how hard it must be for them to be able to talk about this experience. Another thing I would like to discuss is their boundaries. Their personal boundaries have been violated. When they said no or did not consent, they put up a legal boundary around them by saying no. But the problem is that legal boundary, that physical boundary, was disrespected. It was overstepped. And because those boundaries were violated, I would ask the friend to please be patient. This victim is a survivor, and going forward might have issues with building trust with other people. I mean, they have been let down before, and maybe they want to keep their guard up and not let other people in after what's happened to them. You might be the only person that they trust. Please don't do anything to betray that. And please don't pressure them to open up when they're not ready. Remember, trauma is a interesting thing because it doesn't really respect time. Some people who've been through trauma might take years to recover, and they remember something years ago that as if it happened yesterday. Or maybe someone recently experienced trauma, but they try to suppress it so far that it seems like a distant memory. So there is no timeline for overcoming the trauma. It requires patience. Now, keep in mind, the trauma victim might not want you to get too close to them, or maybe they need you to be close to them for them to feel safe, to feel secure. Remember, everyone is unique and everyone is different. So whatever happens, don't take it personally. Just give them patience, give them boundaries. But if they need a little space, give that to them too, and just let them know you will be there for them. And as they open up to you, you need to remind them, this is not their fault. They're going to have lots of strong feelings that they're going to struggle with. Maybe self-blame, maybe they feel guilty, they feel ashamed. Remind them it's not their fault, and 100% of the responsibility in the abuse lies with the perpetrator or the perpetrators. It is never the victim or the survivor's fault, and they should not be made to feel guilty about their experience. I think probably the most important thing you can do for them is be prepared to listen. Show them that you're really listening. You might have a lot of questions, and whatever they have to say could be extremely difficult or upsetting to hear. And don't interrupt them. Just be a good, active listener. One thing I think you should do as a friend is respect their decisions. Be prepared, if they're going down a bad path and you know it's a bad path, have a talk with them. But remember, at the same time, you're walking a fine line, because at the same time you don't want to lose their trust or upset them even more. So please try to respect their decisions. I don't think there's any right or wrong way to feel in this situation. And please don't judge their decisions. I guess the final thing I would like for you to do before we go into the don'ts is let them stay in control. Now, when someone comes to you who's been hurt, it might feel very tempting to want to help fix it or come in and take control of the situation and take over their decision-making authority because you feel you need to correct this injustice. But remember, if you're going to help them, if you're going to go that extra mile, make sure you don't take over and start making decisions for them unless they ask you to. Maybe instead of making decisions for them, give them options and let them explore each option. Let them make their own decisions. Just be there to support them and maybe help guide them a little bit. But don't take over their decision. Don't take over their agency. They've already lost agency of their body. Their boundaries were already violated, and now someone else is going to come in and take control of the situation and make decisions on their behalf because the friend is trying to fix it. Remember, you're there to support them, not take command. Just help them explore their options, help them make their own decisions. In short, help them stay in control. Okay, so that was the do's. Now let's talk about the don'ts. I think one thing we should not do is judge them for how they responded to the sexual assault, the sexual violence, sexual abuse, the rape. There's no right way to react to being raped or experience some type of trauma. Again, everyone's different. Everyone responds and reacts differently. And every response is valid. Remember, if you're in their shoes, because you yourself are unique and different and from other people, you might react differently to how they react. So just remember, don't judge them because everyone responds differently. Another big don't is to question or judge them why they didn't say something sooner. There's lots of reasons why survivors and victims don't want to tell anyone what happened to them. For example, maybe they were trying to pretend it didn't happen and they try to mentally suppress it or block it out. had strong feelings of guilt or shame, and they needed more time to process. Maybe they were under coercion and threats from the abuser, and that's not uncommon. They were scared to report this, to tell anyone about it. They don't want to. Maybe these sometimes this turns into more serious violence because of retaliation. The abuser is not coming back and getting revenge because the victim said something. The abuser, the rapist, is also part of the family and friends network in the community, and bringing this up could have serious ramifications and have a serious impact on relationships in the family or friends or colleagues. Or maybe they did say something sooner, but at the time they were going through some serious PTSD issues, and they just, whoever they did tell didn't think they were credible, and their concerns were ignored or just not believed. And now that they had more time to process the trauma, now they're ready to actually come out and talk about it more and maybe do something about what had happened. One thing I would ask is, subject to any mandatory reporting laws in the state, respect the confidentiality. They are your friend. They opened up to you. You trust them. They wanted to talk about it, and it was remember, what did they have to gain by lying? There's nothing to gain. This is such a traumatic thing. They have to go back to the traumatic experience. They have to talk about it. Why would they? They don't want that type of attention. And so they are respecting their own privacy, and they only opened up to you because they're friends. So you too should respect their privacy. So don't tell anyone. Again, subject to any mandatory reporting laws in the state. I am a family law attorney. I have to insert that in there. I can't tell people they're not allowed to report abuse. But remember, I'm not really looking at this podcast through the legal lens. I'm looking at it more through the lens of a caring, loving friend whose friend was assaulted, and that victim is opening up to them. So just before you do anything, just get their permission. They've already probably have issues trusting people after all these boundaries were violated. So just talk to them. Make sure they are in control. If you start making decisions, reporting things, or telling other people, you might be on the side of the law with mandatory reporting, which is fine, which you're supposed to, but remember, they trust you, so just walk that line very carefully. Okay, another important don't judge them for what they did or didn't do or their behaviors before the sexual assault happened. Because remember, responsibility for the sexual assault lies 100% always with the perpetrator. There is no excuse for rape. I know we read in the news that we read about sexual assault while people are out drinking or wearing certain kinds of clothes or flirting, taking drugs, just being out late with the perpetrator. That is not a justification and has nothing to do with what has happened to them. It's not relevant. So again, going back to my earlier statement, please don't judge them for anything they did before the sexual assault. Okay, now let's talk about your friend and self-harm. If your friend is thinking about harming themselves, there's several things you should do. And remember, everyone's different, everyone's unique. Number one, let them know that you love them and you care about them and you're there to support them. Talk to them and help them explore why they self-harm, and talk about safer options for managing these complex emotions. Now, if they are engaging in behavior that looks like self-harm because of their difficult emotions they're experiencing, remember, just because you can stop the self-harm doesn't mean that the underlying emotions that cause them to want to self-harm will just magically disappear by not self-harming. Remember, the trauma is what caused them the PTSD, which caused these complex emotions leading to wanting to self-harm. So you tell them to not self-harm, the thing that caused them to is still there. So maybe they go, I don't know, overeating because they can't hurt themselves anymore, or they're not going to drink alcohol or self-medicate through alcohol, so they go into overeating, for example. There's other types of coping methods and to help guide them through these complex emotions. Now, remember, self-harm sometimes can lead to suicide. Remember, the fact that they're reaching out and talking about the thoughts of self-harm, the fact that they're reaching out is because they want the help. They need somebody to save them. They're injured. They're not good right now. If the ones that are as an Army veteran, I served in the military. There were times I had fellow soldiers commit suicide. Very sad. It was interesting, though, was the ones that talked about it or let people know that they're experiencing these deep emotions, and we put them on suicide watch. They did not commit suicide. Those were not the ones that committed suicide because they were actively asking for help. They just need help. It is something they're thinking about doing, but if you can just get in there and help them deal with it and maybe get them the professional help they need, then you can get them off of that path. The ones, the soldiers and veterans that I remember serving with, that I did, hear that they committed suicide, they were, now that I recall, they were always the quiet ones. They were not the ones that were on suicide watch because they never told anybody about the emotions going on inside. They were the very quiet about that. It was almost undetected. So remember, when your friend who's a victim of sexual assault talks about suicide or other types of self-harm, remember, they're not telling you that that's what they want to do. They're actually they're crying for help. They're asking for help. They need you to save them to get them out of that mindset. And with that was my final don't. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. And in closing, I just want to leave you with this. Last thing you can do to get help for a friend after they were sexually assaulted. After a sexual assault, your friend may feel fear, shame, guilt, or shock. All of these feelings are normal, and each survivor can feel a different range of emotions at different times in the recovery process. Sexual assault is never the victim's fault. It may be frightening to think about them talking about the assault, but it is important to help your friend get help. You can call these organizations anytime, day or night. The calls are free and confidential. First is National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673. And then there's a National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to my podcast. Thank you.